Hello and welcome to the Navy Blue Corner. I'm Ian, joined as always by my good mate Lockie, and it's the bye week, or just about the end of it. We'll be getting straight into a bit of a mid-season review here, but Lockie, how are you? And how has the bye week treated you? Were you happy to have finally a week off footy?
It was a funny time for it to come around, wasn't it? I think if we'd lost the Gold Coast game, I definitely would have welcomed it with open arms. But I'm just ready for us to start winning again. But I'm doing well. I'm in the process of moving at the moment, so life's all a bit crazy. But I'm excited to chat about all this. We've got a lot planned. I'm excited.
Yes, definitely a lot to get into. So let's crack on. This episode, as I said at the start, it's our mid-season review. So we're going to take a look at the season so far. We'll analyze the squad and have a bit of a look towards the end of the season and a bit of player movement, which is always good. Now, it's clearly been a very disappointing first half of the season. So these kind of reviews are never going to be great, and this isn't going to be fun. But, Lockie, I'm going to ask you if you can rate the season so far out of 10. And if you're watching this on YouTube, drop your rating in the comments below. And if you listen to this wherever you listen to your podcast, head over to socials at Navy Blue Corner and let us know your rating so far out of 10. But now that I've given you enough time to think there with a few plugs, Lockie, what is your rating out of 10?
I appreciate an off-the-cuff question like that. I'm hoping that we get a lot of alignment today. The first number that comes to mind for me is 3.
Oh, yeah. Look, I'm probably slightly harsher. I've gone 2 because all I can think at the moment is 2 wins out of the last 10 or so games. And so for me, it's a 2. And I think that's kind of it. We went in with these expectations of let's go top 8, let's get into finals. And we didn't want to be in the position looking at it at the midway point where we're going to have to do everything we could just to scrape in. We were hoping we were in the higher end of the ladder. I think both of us had the expectation that it wasn't top 4. It was more 5, 6 kind of on the ladder, but definitely a lot better than where we are currently sitting, like 15th on the ladder. And it's just not... It's disappointing to look at knowing exactly where we are right now. And we're just so far from where we want to be. We've talked about it so much throughout this season, exactly what all the issues are, what's not going well for us. So I think we kind of almost skip a little bit of that chat.
I'd love that.
And we'll talk about some positives while we can. So let's talk about favorite game so far, Lockie.
Oh, there's just so many to choose from, isn't there? Just so many great ones so far. I mean, the one that jumps out is definitely the Geelong one.
Yeah.
I think coming off round 1 was a weird feeling. Like, we expected a win, and then I was like, we didn't get it. And now we got to face the ex-premiers. And it was euphoric, to be honest. It felt like everything was right in the world for a moment there.
Yeah, I've got the same one. I said Geelong. I put so much into that game thinking, okay, if we win this, it'll tell us how good we are this season, because it's not a game I feel like Carlton of old would have won. We did it, and I was going, holy shit, maybe we are top 4. Maybe I haven't hyped us up enough, but it just wasn't to be. And unfortunately, we're in a position as well where there's not a lot of games to choose from. Apart from favorite game, Lockie, favorite moment. Is there anything that you've really taken to this season?
It's a good question. I think the West Coast game for me was just, it was full of a bunch of good moments.
Yeah.
Hollands kicked his first goal, the first goal of that game. Kemp got his first. Newey kicked one. Charlie obviously got the 9. So it was just, the love was being spread around everywhere. And when's the last game that we had like that, where you just got to sit back and not be worried at halftime that we're going to lose it? So, those moments were all bundled up for me into a bit of happiness.
No, I'll allow that from you. Mine was in that game. It was a bit more specific. I'll just name one. Luckily, you didn't take my specific one, but it was that last quarter against West Coast, just everything being about trying to get Charlie to 10 goals. I don't know. There was something fun in that where we've won the game. You can sit back and actually enjoy this. And then you could almost sense the players doing everything they could. Didn't matter if they had a set shot at goal or whoever had the ball. It was, where's Charlie? Let's find him the ball. Let's get him to 10. The commentators were getting around it. And I think that was one of my favorite moments, which it's so frustrating. It's so annoying that we're doing this and these are the favorite moments and these are the favorite games. Normally you do this mid-season and there's a lot more to choose from. But unfortunately, that's just the way it is. Trying to keep it positive. Is there a player that has kind of surprised you where maybe you had some lower expectations for you this year? I know, again, it's slim pickings, but is there something that has surprised you in a positive way this year?
Yeah, it's all pretty minor and around the edges, I think, at this stage. I mean, we'll talk about the recruits a bit later. I think particularly like Hollins and Cowan showing up early was a really nice surprise. Not something that I expected them to be able to give the output that they did early. I think Anui's another one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
I've roasted you about 10 times this season on you not having him in your best 22 start of the season. And so I think that's been a nice surprise as one of the oldest guys on the list. There's a couple other little guys like that, but no one I don't think we can say has taken the leap that we hoped someone might to make us that top 4-ish kind of team.
Yeah, I think I've written down Brody Kemp for a similar reason of...
Got him as well.
I didn't go as far as what I did a few years ago of almost delisting a Matt Kennedy and then looking like I have egg on my face for that one. But with a Brody Kemp, I just hadn't seen enough signs so far in his career that I was worried that we weren't going to get much out of Brody Kemp and we'd be sitting here, he's out of contract at the end of the year, and we'd be going, move him on because he's shown us nothing. And I understand that those taller key position players take a little bit longer to get going, but the issue around a Brody Kemp was, what's his best position? Is he an intercept defender? Is he a small defender? Is he a forward? What's he good at? Because I just hadn't seen enough at VFL level. Sometimes you'd get a slight glimpse, but there wasn't enough of those big highlight moments for me. So I was a bit worried going into this season. And look, it feels like he has become a man. His body's definitely up 100%. For it at AFL level. He's reading it well. His intercepts are great. There's so many of those highlight moments so far this year. So I think Brody Kemp has pretty quickly cemented his position in our best 22 and starting to look like someone who has a bit of upside in him, which we love to see. So I think, Brody Kemp is the one that I had almost no expectations for. And all of a sudden he's best 22.
Yeah, you absolutely nailed it. That was one that I had as well. So very happy for Brody.
Yes, so looking at the recruits, I'll go basically through 3 that have played. Pick me up if I've missed out on anyone. But Blake Acres, Ollie Hollins, and Lockie Cowan. What have you thought of all 3 so far?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely give Hollins and Cowan the tick. They're both going to be around it for selection, which is really, I mean, for me, all you can ask for from a first-year player in the type of side that we're in. And then, Acres is an interesting one. I wrote down small tick for him. I think he's still delivering. Obviously, he still deserves that spot on the wing for me. But I was probably hoping for a bit more from him. Not going to say it's all his fault though, because I could list probably 20 guys that haven't got to their expectations this year. But I can't give him a full tick, I would say. Yeah,
look, I definitely agree with Hollins. I think he showed some really good flashes. Loved his efforts. His defensive side of his game is something that I was very impressed with. It was those last minute spoils that he shouldn't have got to, that he jumps in front of a Jack Rewalt and a bigger player, Jeremy Cameron as well, that you think, I didn't know this skinny boy had it in him. Lockie Cowan, it's been fine. Definitely didn't show as much as Hollins. I was probably a little bit disappointed because I had such high expectations of a Lockie Cowan, and I know he's just a kid, so I got to cut him some slack there. But I was hoping to see a bit more of him rebounding from defense. And I hope when we see him come into the team the next time, that's where we see him, rather than he was almost deployed as a little bit more of a lockdown back pocket, but still enough that it's a bit of a tick. Acres has probably been the disappointing one. Started off really well, dropped off considerably. And the reason I probably have I wouldn't say a cross, because it's not a complete failure, and obviously there's so much to go, so I don't want to jump down that kind of rabbit hole, but I've called for him to be a few times this season, which kind of tells you where we're at with him. We were brought in a guy who was experienced to jump in and nail down one wing position, and already he kind of hasn't nailed it down completely. There's still question marks. We need to see more from him. And I was hoping it'd just kind of be more like the Blake Acres in the final series for Freo, where you go, yeah, sweet, this guy's perfect, consistent every single week. Whereas now it's okay, his foot skills are an issue. We're just not getting that kind of 6 out of 10 performance I was expecting week in, week out. But again, it's half a season. There's plenty more to go, and I'm not writing Blake Acres off by any stretch. I'm just a little bit disappointed from what I've seen so far.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think that's fair criticism.
Yes, so now we'll try and compare things a little bit to last year. So I'll bring up some stats throughout this. It works really well if you're on YouTube watching this, because I'll be on your screen as we're talking about it. If you're an audio listener, we'll go through them and try and make it as easy for you guys to follow. But basically, we'll look at the wins and losses to start. So at the moment, we have 5 wins, 1 draw, 8 losses, percentage of 98.1, and sit 15th on the ladder. Last year at the bye, obviously it's not last year, same amount of games. Compared to the 5 wins, we had 10. We didn't have a draw. We had 4 losses compared to the 8 this year. Much higher percentage at 114 compared to the 98, even though we were worrying so much about percentage throughout last season. We're in 5th compared to 15th. So clearly a big drop off compared to the fast start last year. And I've gone a bit deeper into this. And obviously, when you look at just 14 games of last year, it's not exactly the same opposition. So for context, I tried to have a look at the corresponding fixtures and try to find the same things. Obviously, it's not a perfect science. We played Sydney at home last year, got the win, played them away, got the loss. But I've tried to be as similar as possible. And in those 14 games last year, we went 7-7 compared to the 5-8 this year. So similar-ish, but what the comparison again shows to me is you have higher expectations this year. Second year of the coach, second year of the development, players keep going. You'd think you'd keep improving. So to still be down on that ledger is pretty disappointing. What do you kind of make of that comparison?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. The expectation is everything about this season. It's why we're disappointed about where we are. And I think that comparison is, it says a lot. It says a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely not ideal. And now let's go through some stats as well. So we'll take a look at, and these are slightly flawed because I only have recorded up until from last season the bye, which was unfortunately a little bit earlier. We were 8-3, so it's a little bit of a smaller sample size. Obviously, we were flying, but I think it's nice to have a look at when we were doing well last year and compare it to this year when we haven't done well. See if there's any glaring areas or see if there's any similarities. So going through it, disposals currently we rank 2nd in the AFL, whereas last year we were 1st. So very similar. Disposal efficiency, we're 5th. Last year we were 3rd, so using it a little bit better. Kicks, we rank 1st at the moment. We were 2nd last year. Handballs, we rank 3rd. Last year we were 2nd. So probably, even though the kick to handball ratio, when you actually look at the figures, equates to a 1.4 for each, we're probably, in a way, when you maybe actually look deeper at the number, a little bit more balanced in the way we were using it. And why we were still higher in the competition, I think overall we're probably a little bit less of a possession-based team and more of a moving the ball and just dominating teams, winning the ball, rather than it being us just holding onto the ball a bit more defensively. So again, figures and stats look similar, but I think in context, when you actually had watched the football, they read a little bit different. And then the two that I think, one that I think is quite glaring here is the contested possessions. Last year we were 2nd. This year we're 6th. And then uncontested possessions, we're again 1st for both. So I think that contested possessions clearly dropped off. What do you kind of make of the stat comparison between the bye this year and bye last year?
It tells quite an interesting story, I think. I love that you've done this. Like, do you think that, say that there was no team to this and you just got presented these 2 columns, would you be able to confidently say which team you think is performing better? Because
I think you'd probably say, just because of the the massive contrast of second to sixth in contested possessions with everything else being so similar, you'd go, is it the team that was second for contested? But again, not much separates them. And I think that this is just what I touched on earlier of this year. We've had a lot of the ball. We haven't impacted with it. So the stats look great. Oh, you've got heaps of disposals. You've got heaps of the football, but aren't using it. Whereas last year, we managed to get a lot of the football, but it was because we were dominating sides, particularly before the bye. Every single one of those games, we had halves of football where the opposition weren't touching it. So I think it's sort of, it's an interesting comparison. It slightly shifts it in a different perspective. But yeah, the other stats I wanted to show you, which I think these definitely are a little bit better to kind of see where we're at. And one of them is shocking to look at. And we'll start there. Insane. We'll look at the clearances, center clearances. Last year, we went on that very heavy contested brand. We ranked number 1 this year, 18th for center clearances, which is horrific. Stoppage clearances, we were 14th last year, 7th this year. So gotten better at the stoppage. All of a sudden, the center clearances have moved away. Marks, we were 2nd last year. We're 1st at the moment. Didn't get this figure last year at this stage. Impossible unless I spent about a whole week going through every single game and getting all the stats, which I don't have the time to do. But would have been nice to know our marks inside 50 last year. But at the moment, they're 6th. Inside 50s, we were 5th last year, 9th this year. Tackles were 15th last year, 12th this year. And then tackles inside 50, we were 3rd last year, dropped away to 14th. So I think the big differences there are clearly the center clearances moving from 1st to 18th. And then, really the tackles inside 50, 3rd down to 14th. Does that paint a decent picture for you as far as not one you want to look at, but one that makes sense?
Of course. It makes so much sense. And it lines up with the guys that performed last year that have dropped off this year too. Cripps in a Brownlow season, Hewitt with like a pseudo All-Australian season, Pitt's dominance, all these things came together and now we're here and tells a good story.
Yeah, clearly the midfield has dropped off and we haven't seen that midfield dominance. And it was really the Gold Coast game, the last one we did have, where that center clearance work was back and we saw us all of a sudden become a good football team again. And I know that's not necessarily... You can't bank on that every single week. It's not going to happen. It's hard to keep doing. It's not massively sustainable is the word I was bumbling and trying to find there, but it can definitely be a lot better than it is, and it needs to get better if we are to be a good side, because you look at our strengths and clearly it's that inside midfield and clearance work, and when that's been down so much, no wonder we are struggling where we are. And then you look at that tackles inside 50 and how much has forward pressure been an issue, keeping the ball in the forward line, getting those repeat entries, putting the pressure on and equaling scores. Our entries have been poor. We haven't been able to put on the pressure. Tackling hasn't been great. It's just so many little compounding factors, but there are still some areas that clearly have been okay on the stat sheet compared to how things were moving last year. But there's still so many areas that haven't been right for us. So I guess where does that kind of leave you with what you're seeing and what you need to see moving on for the rest of the season?
Well, it's a tricky spot that we're in now. Like I kind of said at the start, the Gold Coast game, we don't want to draw too much from it.
Yes.
But it's hard for me not to have at least a little optimism. You know, if we lost that game by 60 points, then I'd be here saying it's probably hopeless and there's too many things that I want to see that I need to say. Just show me more of that game and we'll at least get somewhere.
Yeah, well, it kind of segued into my next point, which was I've got a few other little stats for you. And it's a bit of a comparison from the most of the season until the last couple of rounds, where I think you kind of pointed out on this in the Essendon game that you noticed a bit more of a shift towards us moving the ball quicker. And then obviously we had it in that game against Gold Coast. So just a couple of interesting things that have clearly been some facets of change so far. Meters gained by handball in rounds 1 to 11. We averaging 96 meters from that, whereas rounds 12 to 14, 227 meters gained by handball. Massive contrast in just a couple of rounds. All of a sudden, using the handball over the kick and using the handball more effectively and efficiently. And I think some of our better football has been shown in those games, even though we obviously didn't have a good game against Essendon, particularly that third quarter. We were trying to move the game on. We were trying to take things on, and it's just a massive difference. And then another one is corridor use from defensive 50, rounds 1 to 12. 14% of the time we use the ball in the corridor when moving the ball out from defensive 50. So that's 14%, whereas rounds 13 and 14, 22%. All of a sudden, massive difference in the amount of time when we had the ball in the defense. Chose to attack it down the quickest part of the ground through the corridor. So clearly there's been a little bit of a shift. Obviously, just very small sample size. Hard to know with the opposition if this is going to continue. But if you're going to have a look at stats and you're going to pinpoint something, if we can just continue that, I think obviously there's so many other issues. But if we can see more of that happening for the rest of the season, I think you're putting yourself in a much better position to at least try to get scores on the board. And you don't know what could happen, I guess, if you're trying to be optimistic looking for the rest of the season.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Did you, I'm loving these stats. Did you get yourself some access to the Champion database finally, mate? This
no, I absolutely wish. Some of that was the last bit was taken off one of the football shows. So someone out there will be like, "You've stolen that from bloody First Crack or whatever." And it's the only place I can get them. The other was me scouring the internet for everything I could.
Great,
so
love it.
Again, we haven't covered a ridiculous amount of what has been bad because we've done it all season. Every single episode has been what isn't working. Back. So what is the point of us continually saying it's the mentality, it's this, the coaching, whatever? I'm sick of talking about it, so we're skipping over that. So anyone that's come to this, listen to any of our reviews. It is in there. I'm sure you've heard us go over plenty of it. So we've tried to do things a little bit differently. And in one of those is looking at almost expectations at the start of the year. So how are we fit now? So let's look at the wins and losses, Lockie. Let's go through them. The start of this season, I'd love to know where you had us and your wins and losses at this stage, because going through Richmond, Geelong, GWS, North Melbourne, Adelaide, St Kilda, West Coast, Brisbane, the Dogs, Collingwood, Sydney, Melbourne, Essendon, and Gold Coast, I had us with 8 wins, and at the moment we sit with 5 wins and 1 draw. Where did you have us on the wins and loss?
I was even more optimistic. But it doesn't seem so silly when you look at the stats you said earlier. I thought that we were going to be 10-4 at this stage, which is what we were last season. So
and when you look at the teams we played, like I had us actually in my predictions going 0-2 to start the season against Richmond and Geelong.
Isn't that crazy?
I then had us going on a bit of a win streak, and then we kind of almost go win-loss for a little bit, and then tail it out with some wins. So I think that was pretty realistic. You saying, hey, let's go 10, let's go a bit bigger. Me going, let's go 8. Very realistic. So very disappointing that we're now 5-1. And I just had a look at, with my prediction, going the 5 wins, where that would have sat us on the ladder. And interestingly, if we were at 8 wins, currently we'd be, depending on percentage, 5th, 6th, or 7th, which is kind of where I had us sitting, say, end of season. So I think it's definitely not
it's a good point.
Unrealistic to have that, and it's frustrating to see that we're just that little bit away from it. And the teams that we have lost to, there was just so many really winnable games. So that's been the frustrating part. But let's try and predict the rest of the season, because we all obviously you have that one game against Gold Coast, and there's a bit more optimism out there without getting ahead of yourselves. So I'm very interested to see. Let's go through them one by one. And I want to see your wins and losses, and then we'll kind of break that down. And because I know some people are still ridiculously optimistic and saying, can we still make finals? What can happen? We'll have a look and see what we need to do if that is the case. Hawthorn, win or loss, Lockie?
I'm not sure whether I should go off what I thought at the start of the season, because it's actually pretty similar. No, I'll change them up now.
Yeah, I reckon we go from now and see, based off everything, what we think can happen.
I mean, it seems like no team can win after the bye, but I think we will.
Yeah, I've got us with a win. Then we've got Freo away.
Oh, mate. How do you know with this team anymore? I feel like we did this at the start of the season. It was so easy. Like, I'm delusional.
You've got a win?
Yeah.
I've got a loss. So good to see you're a bit more optimistic than
They're
me.
not good. They're not good.
Port Adelaide.
Yeah.
At home.
I would pencil that in as a loss, personally.
Yeah. I've gone a loss, and it's interesting. At the start of the season, I had Freo as a loss, but I had Port as a win. So insane that there's a little bit of difference in that one. West Coast, surely a win. I don't think we have to talk about that.
Booster.
And Collingwood, are we winning this one?
Yeah, well, that's the thing about this one and the next game. You like to think that we can
even
halve any ledger. So why can't we be optimistic?
Unfortunately not. I have us with a loss currently, but I had us with a win here because I had us losing to Collingwood earlier in the year. I've actually had us going with and then St Kilda, I had us losing earlier, have a win here. And I'm going a win again over the Saints, regardless of what I said earlier this season. Are you going a dub over the Saints?
Oh, mate, this is depressing me out because I want to say win for every one of these games because I am still delusional and believe in these guys. So, no, put me through as a loss.
You've gone a loss for the Saints. Fair enough. Sure. What about Melbourne? What's happening with that one? I'm fence sitting. I'm
about to crack it with this exercise because I wouldn't be surprised if we won it and we'll probably lose by 40.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Well, we've got two more to go.
We're going with the Ian vote for these last ones.
And then, the last two obviously win against Gold Coast and GWS. So basically off that, let me add this up. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm saying you've gone 7 wins there, Lockie. I'm saying we're beating Melbourne off that for you, which is what I actually predicted originally for myself for the back end of the season. Whereas at the moment, I had a couple more losses, depending. That Melbourne one, if you pencil in a win, it goes 6. If there's a loss, it's 5, which off my scale for me ended up being 10, 11 wins to finish it off, which it's that tough thing. So say we get, I originally had us a lot more, which would have got us to 5th or 6th wins originally, whereas my 10-11, which I predict, gets us 10th, 11th, 12th, which I think is that realistic kind of area of where, because of what we've done in that first half, lost some games we should have won. If you go maybe a bit more of a pessimistic side, probably you'd say fair enough. But I think this is where a lot of people are still trying to be optimistic and going, well, okay, what do we need to do to make finals from here? Let's say we turn it around. That Gold Coast win was exactly what we needed. And realistically, we need to basically win 7 or 8 in this stretch. Because if we go, which is insane, because if you go 7-2 with the draw, it takes you to 12 wins, 1 draw, which would ideally, because of that draw, get you into finals. Rather than having to get the 13, it should get you there, which is going 7-2. 7 wins, 2 losses. Going off my more pessimistic side of a win against Hawthorn, a win against West Coast, win against the Saints, win against Gold Coast and GWS. Got to get 2 more wins. What are the more realistic ones for you in that to turn them into dubs? And where are our 2 losses coming from if you could predict the perfect run from here, realistically, as best you can?
Wow, give me a harder question in the entire life of this podcast. I mean, if I'm being a complete realist, I would say that Collingwood and Melbourne are the 2 most likely to lose, right?
Yeah. I would say I'm pretty similar with you. I'd probably go Collingwood and Port, even though it's in Melbourne, because they're playing so well. Yeah. But I think, look, and this is, again, let's go full glass, half full. Or just glass is full. There's not, it's to the brim. Is Freo aren't playing amazing football. It's away. but get the win. Port's a tough one. It's here, so you give yourself a bit of hope. West Coast, you win. Collingwood, I think this is maybe a ridiculous hot take for you, Lockie. If we beat Hawthorn, we win one of Freo and Port, beat West Coast. If we beat Collingwood, I'd say we'd make finals because I feel like that would be a monkey off the back, something for this playing group to be like, we've beaten Collingwood, we've got it done. Momentum's with us. Steamroll home. I'm just not sure it's actually going to happen. I haven't seen really anything this season to show me that would happen. But yeah, I agree. Then Collingwood would be the loss, and then you've got to win another one there out of your Melbourne and St Kilda because you can only have 2 losses, which, yeah, if you're saying you're beating the obvious of the Hawks, Eagles, Saints, Suns, Giants, then you need to win 2 out of the 3, basically, of Freo, Port, Collingwood, Melbourne. Like, it's grim viewing when you look at it, what needs to happen for us to make finals. 7-2 run. It's tough.
If I think back to the start of the season, I think there was a bit of a range of what people were predicting we were going to get. There was obviously some people were saying top 4, some people were saying we wouldn't make the 8, kind of being around last year. I don't think anyone was really thinking that we were going to be this low. And so, and with how these last few weeks have been, I just don't have the audacity to say that I know any idea how this is going to go over this period. Why you can argue any way, I think. You can argue that the Gold Coast game was an outlier. We're going to win one more game the rest of the season against West Coast. Or you can easily argue to me that we're now on the right trajectory. And why can't we just keep building on this now? So, anything that you tell me that could happen the rest of the season right now, I'll say, you know what? Sure. It very well could happen. Anything's really possible.
No, look, I love the optimism, and I'm obviously going to hope
it's also the pessimism.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
It's also, I wouldn't be surprised
we have no
if
idea.
West Coast is the only other win we have.
Or we lose to West Coast at this rate.
Sure. They gotta win sometime.
And it's hard to predict things, but I think it's a fun exercise to kind of look at what we predicted earlier in the season and then what we predict now, because maybe it gives me hope that I predicted from this run of games that we'd have 7 wins, that the only ones we'd lose would be against Melbourne and we'd lose to Freo away. Start of the season, I thought that was possible. I thought we'd time it perfectly, have this amazing run, and then who knows what could happen. We'd maybe finish just outside the top 4, get maybe a home final, win the first one, and see what happens. And knowing that's potentially still in this squad somewhere, can it happen? Obviously it can, but I think at the moment I'm being a bit more pessimistic in my expectations for the rest of the season, where I have not seen a big enough sample size of us playing good footy this year to think that it's going to turn around from here on out and we'll make finals. And so I'm not, while we've done this exercise and we're talking about it, I'm not really focused on finals. That's out of my sight. I am, as I think I touched on in one of the last episodes we had, was just looking at, what do I want out of this season? Let's take finals out of it. And I need to see us building enough and game style and everything from here on out where I can go into next season with a bit of optimism of, the first half was dog shit, but the second half we've built something in there. And if we can just continue on that trajectory, have a good off season, we can go back and unfortunately you can write off this first half of the year, but line in the sand from now on, we're playing finals next year and we're turning this club around. And that's what I'm trying to look at. So while we've obviously gone through the finals and everything, I think you can only really afford to lose 2 more games for this season. And I just don't know if this group have got that pressure in them to know how to deal with that from there. But let us know what you think. What games are we winning? What games are we losing? Is finals possible? Who knows? It's hard to predict the future. If we could, we'd all be bloody millionaires by now. But as I said, I wanted to hear from you guys from your predictions, but I wanted to hear your questions. We chucked it on Twitter at Navy Blue Corner. Asked you guys to send them in. What are the people asking us, Lockie?
Got some good future questions here. Got some more reflections. let's start with this one here. So this is from at Alpha NSRS. We talked about our favorite game. They want to know worst loss for the year. For them, it was the Sydney game.
Yeah, it probably should be the Essendon game, but I think it's the Sydney game for me as well, because I just remember the emotions, but that was the heaviest I took any loss, because I kind of pinned my hopes on our season in that, thinking they're depleted. I don't care that it's away. We need to win this game of football. They just beat North Melbourne by a bloody interchange infringement. This is the game that turns the season around. If we don't win this, we're done. We lost it in really poor fashion, which has been the disappointment, if I could put everything into a nutshell this year. It's not just the loss on paper, it's how the loss happened. It was the actual performance that's been the big issue, and I think that was it again for Sydney. We missed so many easy chances, and it was just one of those ones you penciled in as a win that you go, oh God, then who can we win against? And so I think, the Sydney one was the one that almost broke me.
That's fair. Yep. Those two came to mind for me. I just can't go past Adelaide.
Yeah,
I know now, like some people think that they're good, but that was just like ultimate demoralizing loss. Even though I think it was our first loss, which is crazy, but it was just that first quarter was just the worst football I've seen this year. Then we had again the audacity to at the start of the fourth quarter, it was like, oh my God, are we going to come here? And then they just piled them on. It was just a horrible, horrible viewing.
Yeah. You know it's bad when I'm at home and I start to watch some Ted Lasso in that last quarter instead. I've just got that as well, because it was abysmal. But hopefully we won't have too many more of those. That's what I'm hoping for the rest of this season. At least turn it on for something. But good question. I enjoy it to some degree.
This is a good question too. I'm keen to keep a finger on the pulse of where you're with this for the rest of the season and into the off-season.
Okay.
So from Clarence Worley, it seems like Damien Hardwick may have orchestrated a move out of Richmond with prior knowledge of what club he'll be coaching at next. For me, that's either us or West Coast. Thoughts?
I've not thought too much of the Damien Hardwick. I know at time of recording that Dylan Friends episode is out. I listened to the first probably 10 minutes of it. I haven't had a chance to get through it.
Where are you at right now?
I heard the little snippet on Instagram of him saying that he does still want to coach. It's just a matter of when. Look, it's in that boat of like an Alistair Clarkson, where he can pretty much dictate wherever he wants to go. And if that club is available, he can have it. So I think he's going to sit back. He needs some time off. I would hate for us to rush into him. I'm also not convinced that let's say everything goes bad at Carlton, we need another coach, that Hardwick is the guy anyway. Because if you look at every single premiership coach of the past bloody 15 years, most of them, like 99% of them, are all first-time coaches at that club. It doesn't happen. This fallacy of you bring in the former winner and he fixes your problems, it doesn't seem to happen. That history isn't showing that, at least in the modern era. So I'm not...
Yes, great call.
Even if things go bad, thinking that it needs to be Hardwick. I think that there's definitely a world where next season we start like we did this year and you go... Voss at the end of the season is probably gone. Maybe he gets sacked with a few games to go, and then Hardwick's in the conversation. I hope that's not the case, but
God,
if this happens, if it happens where at some stage through next season Voss is gone, we're not just going to have a Hardwick come in and it's going to be premiership. It's going to be like 5 years of a build, because you're going to have to gut this list. A Cripper, a bloody Harry Mackay, half these players are probably going to have to get moved on, because you have to completely change what players are contracted to where. Some players are not going to want to stay there for another rebuild. You'd have to gut so much, it's not funny. So, it's an interesting one. What's your thoughts on kind of that whole scenario?
Oh, yeah. No. You've took all the words out of my mouth. I would be so... just so disappointed if we did give up on Voss at the end of this season.
Yeah.
Bring in someone new, and then it's the same old. Yeah. Like, there's just no way to know that's bringing in someone with everything that we are right now is going to turn us around. And maybe it would, but if it didn't, then that's just going to look, you know, how many coaches have we had in the last, 12 years? It's a joke.
Yeah. And even on that, if I'm Damien Hardwick, I don't know if I'd want to coach Carlton.
If we do what you said and have to gut it, then why would
I think you'd have to. And then
I guess there's still
there's still question marks on us as whether the players have the ability, even though we've got some top end.
Yeah.
Then is he thinking, if it goes wrong in half a year, they'll sack me? Because that's what Carlton seem to do. Like, would he want to go into that environment? Would he see a club that's been not successful for the last 20 years and go, oh yeah, I'll be the one that turns that around? I'm not sure he would. So it's an interesting discussion, but I hope it's one that we aren't having. Hopefully Vossi and Co can kind of steer this ship for us.
Fingers crossed. So from Raceboy 458, they say, love your content, lads. Is it finally, this is a very interesting question. Is it finally time to address the preseason Sydney performance in the context of how the season has played out, and how much do we read into it? Wow, there's a lot of ways that you could go with that.
Well, I think we said at the time, I hope we don't have to read anything into this, and hopefully it's just a preseason game. But yeah, I mean, definitely a tale of that when that Adelaide game happened. I think that was something where my mind went to of, well, this is what I saw against Sydney. Us just disappear. So I don't know. It was maybe a warning sign, but it's so hard to know how much you read into that. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer.
It is a great question.
It definitely didn't set us up for success, for sure.
It didn't.
But there's been a lot of issues throughout. I don't think you can pin it just on one preseason game, but definitely what we saw in that game we've seen throughout, and it hasn't been in a positive way.
But people also said after that game, Sydney aren't going to have the post-grand final woes. And look what happened there. And take me back to the bloody Wizard Home Loans Cup when we were the absolute goats of that cup.
Give me a bloody Prendergast from 80 meters for a super goal. That's what I want to see.
That is a genuine core memory.
Way too cool. It should not be one of the go-to memories I have as a Carlton supporter.
We shouldn't be. What jersey were we wearing that game? What jumper? You remember?
Just the regular.
Okay. Just shout out to our tier list video, which has gotten some nice feedback. I'm glad that I haven't received any slander for my takes. Not.
Well, you shouldn't have liked the grey jersey. And anyone, actually, if there are people listening to this on their preferred, I almost just said Spotify, their preferred podcast listening service, you may not be aware, we did a bit of a tier list, a bit of a ranking of pretty much every single Carlton jumper that there's ever been. It's on our YouTube as an exclusive because it's way too visual that I just thought it'd be so stupid to release this in podcast form. So if you love your Carlton jumpers and love a tier list, jump over to the YouTube again. It's going to be navy blue corner. All you have to type in. It's going to be there. Links will be bloody everywhere if you need to find it on our socials. It's a good watch for sure. And you can then leave in the comments all your abuse towards Lockie for liking that horrific grey jumper.
Friend of the podcast, Robbo, J-Rob, was a fan of the grey, he said, but his feedback was that heritage jumper is disgusting. You two are fucked. So it's good. We've got a nice divisive topic and it is a good one. So I recommend it.
Great for the content for sure. Great for engagement, I think, is the thing that the people say these days.
You know, I love a good clean segue out of listener questions into our next segment. So I'll read off a couple here, which are a little preface. So from Mickey C's, who should go at year's end based on our current form and ladder position? I have Lloyd and Russell in the footy department, then Dow, Marchie, Ed, Silvani, Honey, Plough, Gov, Phil, Acui, and I'd throw in Lobb, but he's contracted.
A lot.
And one other question here on a bit of a different topic from Bryza. How many higher end draft picks could and should end up with this year, either through trading or what we've got? As in, do we make a play for one or two top end picks or spread it out across lower picks? Oh boy, this is your wheelhouse, Brownie.
We will indirectly answer these questions because we're going to dive into something quite deep here, and I'm very undecided. You're getting behind the curtain in my brain here in the planning of the Navy Blue Corner podcast, because there's a chance that the rest of what you're listening to is going to be in a part 2 of this, or it's all going to be one thing. We'll see how long this ends up going. Sorry to interrupt this episode, but this one did end up going long like we thought it might. So we're going to split it up into 2 parts. This will finish part 1, and then part 2 will focus on analyzing the list, going through so many potential incomings in the draft, in trade. Everything is covered. We go through like every out-of-contract player. It's a lot of fun. So yes, that'll finish part 1. There is plenty more in store in part 2. See you guys next time.